Oil prices surged past $100 a barrel for the first time since 2022 as the fallout from the US-Israel war with Iran continued to rattle global markets and leading economies moved to tackle a worsening energy supply crisis. A weekend of escalating violence in the Middle East intensified concerns around a sustained supply crunch, propelling oil prices to their highest level in 4 years and triggering a deep stock market sell-off. The surge will send ripple effects to oil and energy markets around the world. Well, to help us understand this and to unpack it further, we're joined by energy economist Dr. Lungile Mashele, who joins us now live. Dr. Mashele, good evening. Thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. I'm going to start this conversation with an incredibly rudimentary question, but it's an important question nonetheless. Why does oil and disruptions to oil supply chains have an inflationary impact throughout capital markets across the world and, of course, ripple down effects into our pockets?
So thank you so much for having me. So the one thing we need to understand about oil is that it is an input to a lot of our goods and services. Think of your daily life, how you get to work, how you get ready for work in the morning, what you eat, how the food gets to your table, where the food and how the food is produced at some farm. A lot of our lives are reliant on energy, whether it's oil, whether it's gas. And so it then forms part of a huge bill in terms of our own lives. So if you look at what you would typically spend on a monthly basis, yes, there's your electricity, but there's your petrol as well. There's also the food that I had mentioned. There's medical costs. There's so many other things that you're also adding on. And so as a result, if that increases by even a marginal amount, it then has an impact on inflation.
How insecure is South Africa's energy supply and supply chains?
So South Africa is energy insecure. One, if you consider that 2020, 2019, we were producing about 700,000 barrels, or we were refining rather, 700,000 barrels per day. We're now down to just over 100,000 because we've closed our refineries. So that's the first thing. Secondly, we are susceptible to what's happening in the Middle East purely because we do import from Nigeria, yes, but we also import crude from Saudi Arabia. Now, we import about 11 billion liters of crude, but there's another 16 billion of refined product. And refined product then refers to LPG, diesel, petrol, jet fuel, and we get this from the countries that are directly impacted: Kuwait, Bahrain, Oman, and they supply us. So the closure around the Strait of Hormuz is going to impact us incredibly, and not just us, almost everybody in the world, because that passage is important for refined product and for crude.
Yeah, so we have the capacity to refine our own products. At our best, you say 700,000 barrels a day. Of course, if we can get things in Mossel Bay to be up and running again in organizations like Petro SA, who are currently exporters, by the way, in the midstream market of refined product, surely we can then leverage that. But we would have to ensure that we have enough crude oil, would we not? Should we be worried about that on that front, given that 60% of our crude comes from Angola and Nigeria combined?
So I would certainly be worried, and I'm basing this from comments coming out of Nigeria earlier on, where they basically said they need to start looking inwards to make sure that they are energy secure. So if I speak about the 10 billion liters that we import from the globe, like in terms of crude, 4.5 billion liters of that, so about half of that comes from Nigeria alone. So we're susceptible to that supply chain. And if they are talking about being inward looking and they're talking about ensuring that they have security of supply for Nigerians, it does place us in a precarious position.
Yeah, but do we have local resources that we in the interim can leverage. Coal to gas conversion technologies exist. We actually do use some of it sometimes, at least when Eskom is in a crisis. And of course, we still have the contentious Orange Basin that we can consider. What alternatives do we have at our disposal?
We actually don't have many alternatives. So you've got the Sasol Secunda refinery, and it's been in existence for a number of years, and they basically do synfuels and chemicals at their plant, and you're basically looking at about 100,000 barrels a day, which is what they refine. You also have Astron Energy, which is in Cape Town, and they basically also import and then they refine in the country. Orange Basin is still years away. That's what Namibia has been doing, has been focusing on to make sure that they have oil and gas and that they are energy secure. South Africa should have taken this lead from the developments that we've had on our own coast in terms of developing our own resources, and perhaps we would not be so vulnerable as we are at the moment.
Can we look to Namibia?
Not now. We cannot look to Namibia. Closest is Angola, and you've got Nigeria, but they're also saying that in times like this, they will not jeopardize their own nations as well. And basically, we have to hope that this conflict ends rather swiftly and that the Strait of Hormuz basically opens up and we're able to access this oil, gas, refined products that we actually need.
Yeah. How soon do you anticipate this to have a inflationary impact and we begin to see economic contractions to the point of potentially, at least in the global south, to be worried about? And of course, that economic contraction can lead to devastating effects.
It's hard to tell, but I can tell you that if you look at the end of March, you're already going to feel it. You're going to feel it in the price of food. It's going to be there in the price of your petrol as well. Luckily in South Africa, our electricity is determined on an annual basis or a multi-year price determination process. But in other countries, for instance, it's determined on a monthly, weekly, intraday, day basis. So they feel it acutely. So we're still shielded in that regard, but it basically means that this cost is being carried by a utility, whether it's Eskom or some other entity, for the remainder of this year. But it certainly will come through. And there will be many other shocks, as we go along, specifically in the next, let me say, 2 to 3 months. Because even if the Strait of Hormuz opens up tomorrow morning, the production facilities are shut down. So Saudi has shut down, Oman, Bahrain, Kuwait, everybody has shut down production. So it's going to take them anything between 2 to 4 weeks to get full production up and running.
Maybe just the last question in 10 seconds. We are out of time here. Is that announcement coming out of the G7 that they're going to make reserves available? And that seemed to have stabilized oil prices a little bit. Earlier this afternoon, at least 20 hours ago, we were looking at over $100 a barrel. We're now looking at a number floating around to $80 a barrel after the fact of that announcement. Do you anticipate that to sustain?
I think it will sustain us for the interim. The question is how long are we going to, how much oil does it actually mean, and how much are we going to have, and who's going to have access to it, and can they quell down these prices?
Yeah. But we're going to have to leave it there. Dr. Mashele, thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. Dr. Lungile Mashele is an energy economist.